All right. Well, welcome everyone to the latest Drawdown Georgia webinar in our series, Climate Solutions That Go Beyond Carbon. My name is Blair Beasley, and I am the Director of Climate Strategies at the Ray C. Anderson Foundation. We have been proud to support Drawdown Georgia and its efforts to grow high-impact climate solutions in our state. I am excited for this discussion today and our all-star panel of speakers. This is actually a follow-up conversation to a webinar we hosted in late 2021. Back then, we were giving a preview and setting the stage for the 2022 Integrated Resource Planning process for Georgia Power. Well, that IRP cycle is now complete, so we are back to discuss both what was at stake and, importantly, what happened. So the research that underpins Drawdown Georgia identified 20 high-impact solutions for our state that, if scaled to ambitious but achievable levels, could collectively cut Georgia's greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030 as compared to 2005 levels. The pathway for growing many of these solutions runs in part through the IRP process and decisions made at the Georgia Public Service Commission. And as we'll talk about today, how climate solutions expand in our state will impact Georgia's carbon footprint, as well as the communities and individuals who live here. So a few quick programming notes before we dive in. I'm going to briefly introduce our panel, and following their presentations, we will be opening it up for audience Q&A. So please add your questions to that Q&A chat box, and I will do my best to get to as many of them as possible. And now for our speakers. First, we will hear from Kevin Kelly. Kevin is an independent policy advisor to Southface Institute and is a principal with Kirkwood and Kelly Consulting. Then we'll hear from Jill Kaiser. Jill is a senior attorney and leader of the Solar Initiative at the Southern Environmental Law Center. Next, we'll hear from Briante McCorkle. Briante is the executive director of Georgia Conservation Voters. And then finally, we'll hear from Alicia Brown. Alicia is the Clean Energy Program Manager with the City of Savannah's Office of Sustainability. As I said, this is a really exciting group. So with that, Kevin, I will turn the mic over to you to kick off our program.
Thank you, Blair. Good morning, everyone. Go ahead to the next slide. My goal today is set the stage a little and just talk about what is the IRP and the rate case and how those fit together. So 2022 was a very big year for electricity regulation at the Georgia Public Service Commission, and I'll call that the PSC throughout the rest of my presentation. The year opened with the Integrated Resource Plan, 2022 IRP, is what I'll refer to it going forward, from January to July. We'll talk more about it, but you can think of the IRP as determining what is the plan for the utility. And then 2022 rate case followed right on the heels of the IRP, starting in July and ending in December. And I think you can think of it as determining how to pay for the plan. So first come up with the plan and then figure out how to pay for it. By statute, the IRP happens every 3 years. The current approach in Georgia generally has been to have a rate case every 3 years immediately following the IRP. This is practice, but not legally required. And if anybody has any questions about that, we can pick that up in Q&A. Go ahead to the next slide. So what is the IRP? In simplest terms, the IRP is a 20-year plan. The IRP must contain the utilities, electric demand and energy forecast for its service territory for at least a 20-year period, and then describe the utilities program for how it's going to meet that the forecasted requirements in an economical and reliable manner. And so I think one way to think about it is what are the questions that they try to answer as part of the IRP? So I think some of the questions that the utility is grappling with and the commission must rule on is, what plants will the utility decommission and when? What size and what type of plants will it build and when? Or what agreements does the utility need to enter for new long-term power purchases? What transmission improvements and expansions are needed to maintain reliable service? And this has become kind of critical and important issue in the IRP, ever more so. Then they look at the benefits. What are the benefits of adding renewable energy resources to the system? And how would the implementation of energy efficiency, what's often called demand-side management in the regulatory circles, how would that help lessen the forecasted load and benefit customers? So every 3 years, as I said, the Georgia Power must file its integrated resource plan with the Commission. And briefly, the origins of the Act. Why do we have the IRP? The IRP came into being with the IRP Act of 1991. And in part, this grew out of a problem in the past of trying for the PSC to rule on investments by the utility after the fact. Now the IRP, going back to my original diagram, sets the plan up first and then talking about costs. So really the utilities never coming before the Commission asking to recover costs that haven't been approved in the planning process. Go ahead to the next slide. So several of the Georgia Drawdown solutions got addressed in the 2022 IRP, and I'm just going to touch on them lightly, and I think others are going to talk more about them. Large-scale solar. So since 2013, the IRP has included approval of large solar buying or energy procurement by Georgia Power. And then since 2019, it's also added the approval of large solar buying or subscription programs whereby large customers can participate that and buy solar through the utility. And I would say that I really think it's important to underscore that these programs are really, I think, the single largest driver of new utility scale solar development in the state. The IRP also addresses demand response and energy efficiency. That's included in Georgia Power's overall demand-side management plan. Rooftop solar. While rooftop solar got discussed a lot in the 2022 IRP, the core issue ultimately got deferred to the rate case, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But there were some ancillary issues around the renewable cost benefit framework and what's the valuation of distributed renewable resources on the system. And then retrofitting buildings, of course, is addressed in Georgia Power's overall demand-side management plan. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so this is my attempt to do the 2022 rate case in one diagram. And I think the diagram actually explains Georgia Power's rate case, but also rate cases in general. So you can think of it in 3 steps, and I'll talk about it or let's say 4 key questions that a rate case addresses. First is, what are the revenue requirements or the cost to serve customers for the utility? So how much revenue does Georgia Power need in this case to cover its cost to serve customers and earn a reasonable return on its investment in equipment that it uses to serve customers? And so part of an issue that's buried in that, but I say buried is maybe the wrong metaphor since it's really one of the key issues that gets debated in a rate case, is the return on equity for the utility. So what is that reasonable rate of return for the utility to earn on its investment in equipment? So that's determining the cost of service. Then once you have a cost of service, how do you allocate those costs to customers? And so typically they allocate buckets of cost utility, different classes of customers, because different customers use energy differently and they cause costs on the system differently. So there's a process of allocating those costs to different classes and then to the actual rate tariffs themselves. And then finally, the rate design. What are good rate designs for the various classes of customers? And so those rate designs do a couple things. One, they have to hit those revenue requirements or class revenue requirements for the utility to earn what it needs or recover what it needs to in terms of cost. And then also it should fit or give customers options depending on how they use electricity. Go ahead to the next slide. So that description, I would sort of say, is the technical description of what happens in a rate case. There were a few themes or special issues that I want to mention that came up in the Georgia Power 2022 rate case. First is the net metering program. And this is really a debate about what is the value of energy exported from behind the meter distributed renewable generation system. So think of a rooftop solar system when it's behind the meter and it exports energy to the utility or to the grid. What should the utility pay for that? I think others will talk more about that. The electric vehicle charging infrastructure program, Georgia Power did, or the Public Service Commission approved Georgia Power to invest in expanding the electric vehicle charging infrastructure in the state. Residential rate design. There was a lot of debate about what are appropriate designs for charging residential customers, including are demand rates appropriate for residential customers, and promoting the adoption of time of use rates and what might be called other modern rate designs. And then finally, data access. This is really about, can utilities get the right, can customers get the right level of granularity of their own electricity use data so that they can do things like assess what's the best rate for them, or if they're looking at putting solar. And so really this is about customers getting access to hourly electricity use data. And then one kind of theme that was woven throughout the proceeding was the rate impacts that are on the horizon, because clearly they were debating at this point what was going to be approved in the 2022 rate case, mindful of the fact that there is coming up a fuel case that will add to customers' bills, and then also the final approval of the Vogtle costs. Next slide. So finally, I just want to close just a reminder that there's lots of ways for interested stakeholders to get involved at the Public Service Commission, including you can follow the dockets online. They're all done by YouTube, and so it makes it easy to follow the proceedings online. There's the opportunities to make public comment. You can make public comment at hearings in person, and then also submit public comments online. Meeting with commissioners is a good way to talk directly to the commissioners. They are popularly elected constitutional officers, and so anyone can set up a meeting with a commissioner. And then finally, intervening in the docket. This is a more formal process of becoming a party, and there's a number of different organizations that become parties to the case. And so while it seems kind of far away, I just want to remind this is all going to start over again. And so to keep in mind, if you're in the future interested in being involved, all of this will kick off again in January 2025 with the 2025 IRP. And I think that is it for me.
Great. Thanks so much. Kevin, can you hear me? My computer was not cooperating.
I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. Can you tell us a little bit about what's coming next? If people want to continue to engage with the Public Service Commission on these issues, what are their next opportunities?
Sure. And these issues, I'll interpret that broadly. So coming up shortly, there will be the fuel docket. And so the PSC oversees the recovery of the cost that the utility incurs for fuel, things like natural gas, coal, uranium, separately from a base rate proceeding. And so that will start in late February and run through, I think, June, with the final new rates effective in July. And just so folks know, there are significant costs at play in the upcoming fuel cost recovery docket, because the currently fuel costs have been rising and the utility's under-recovered in its fuel balance. And so really quite significant, in fact, more significant perhaps than the rate case. And then perhaps toward the end, depending on the timing, toward the end of 2023 or late 2023, there will be a proceeding to determine the final cost recovery related to Vogtle Unit 4 and the whole project of Vogtle 3 and 4. And those are really, I think, the most important dockets on the near-term horizon.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I'm going to turn the mic over to Jill Kaiser next. Jill, you have the floor.
Thanks, Blair. I'll go to the next slide, please. So today I'm going to be talking about how the Georgia Drawdown Solutions fared in the 2022 Public Service Commission proceedings that Kevin mentioned, the resource planning proceeding or IRP, and the rate case. I'm going to focus, Blair mentioned the top 20 drawdown solutions that Georgia Drawdown had listed, and I'm going to focus on a couple of those: large-scale solar, which was listed as the #1 drawdown solution, rooftop solar, demand response, and retrofitting. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so first off, I want to talk about large-scale solar and give a little bit of context and background. So the 2022 IRP really built on a lot of progress that's already been made in Georgia. So according to the National Solar Energy Industry Association, Georgia ranks 7th nationally for total solar installed. And the state has more than 4,500 megawatts of solar already in the ground. And that's enough to power about 525,000 homes. And most of this is large-scale solar, big utility-scale developments, and much of it is a part of Georgia Power's portfolio. And when Georgia Power filed its 2022 IRP plan last January, it said that they will have nearly 5 gigawatts of solar and wind resources online by the end of 2024. And almost all of that solar, it's about 4,700 megawatts of solar. Almost all of this capacity has been approved in these Public Service Commission dockets, like the IRP proceedings. So that's what makes these proceedings so important. So what happened in 2022? So in the IRP proceeding, the commission ultimately granted Georgia Power authority or approved 2,300 megawatts of new renewable energy resource capacity. Much of this, if not all, will likely be solar resources. About 2,100 of that will be large-scale solar installations or renewable installations. That means they'll be greater than 6 megawatt project size. And then 200 megawatts of that will be new distributed generation renewable resources, but those projects can be up to 6 megawatts in size. So I think Georgia Drawdown draws a line at 5 megawatts in size for large scale solar. So I think a lot of this, most of the 2,300 megawatts of new capacity will be large scale solar. I know that in the Georgia Drawdown materials, there's also discussion about how solar plus storage could increase reliability and is an interesting opportunity. So I did also want to flag that Georgia Power came into the IRP proceeding with a big ask for new battery energy storage systems that could be paired with renewables or could be independent or, not paired with renewables. The commission ultimately approved 500 megawatts of new storage capacity and provisionally approved a 265 megawatt storage project that Georgia Power had proposed. So a lot of new storage coming online as well. You can go to the next slide, please. So Kevin teed up that rooftop solar was a big issue in both proceedings. And I'm sure many of you participating have heard a bit about this fight in Georgia. So in the IRP and the rate case, many advocates pushed for the expansion of a popular 5,000 customer net metering program that Georgia Power had created following the 2019 rate case proceeding. Georgia Power did not support expanding that program. Net metering effectively allows rooftop solar customers to use 100% of their homegrown energy. And so it makes rooftop solar much more affordable and financeable. And that means it's more accessible to everyday folks and people that might not be able to afford the upfront cost of going solar. So ultimately, in the IRP proceeding, the commission kicked the can down the road to the rate case. And when we got to the rate case, the commission declined to expand the net metering program. And instead, it set a new compensation rate. So before the new rate was put in place, Georgia Power was paying about 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour for exported solar from folks that had rooftop solar. And now with the new rate in place for 2023, that export rate will be about 6.8 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's about 2.5 times higher. I think time will tell. It's not clear that's enough to move the market. There wasn't really evidence about that in the case. So then another issue I just wanted to highlight briefly is community solar. Georgia Power has had a community solar program in place for several years. It's priced as a premium product, which means there's an added cost to participate. And it's to date been woefully undersubscribed. There's a lot of open shares. So there was some discussion in both the IRP and the rate case because Georgia Power proposed increasing the subscription price by several dollars from its already premium priced product. And several parties urged the commission to instead lower the subscription price, and commission staff even testified the price could be as low as $20 instead of $25 a share to still allow Georgia Power to recover its costs and then give customers an opportunity to save money on bills or at least achieve bill neutrality by participating. Ultimately, the commission didn't adopt the company's proposal or what some of the interveners had proposed. Instead, the commission lowered the subscription price by $1 from $25 a month to $24 a month for residential customers. Next slide, please. Okay, so energy efficiency, I sandwiched this a bit under retrofitting and demand response in the Georgia Drawdown solutions. So first, a little bit of context. In 2021, Georgia Power had achieved about 0.4% savings through its energy efficiency portfolio or demand side management portfolio, as Kevin mentioned. And that's 0.4% savings based on its prior year peak or prior year sales. And that's well below the national average. As an example, Duke in North Carolina achieves about 1% savings. So it's performing, its energy efficiency portfolio performs about 2.5 times better. Georgia as a whole ranks about 39th or right near the bottom on ACEEE's scorecard when it comes to energy efficiency. So this is definitely an area where we could stand to improve and be a bit more competitive on the national scale. So in the IRP proceeding, clean energy advocates pushed for increased investment in energy efficiency programs. Advocates argued that ramping up program investments was not only cost effective and a good decision, but it could also allow Georgia Power to avoid entering into some of the new methane gas capacity contracts that it had proposed. Specifically, advocates were pushing to have savings ramp up to about 1% over a 3-year period, more similar to its neighbor like Duke. The commission ultimately voted to ramp up savings above what Georgia Power had proposed, but didn't go quite as far as clean energy advocates had pushed. The commission approved a 15% increase in savings goals. And that's similar to what the commission had done in 2019. So pushed the company a little bit beyond where it had come in, but there's still a lot of room for improvement. I also wanted to highlight a big rate design win from the 2022 rate case. So in response to advocacy from commission staff and a number of interveners, the commission undid a decision from the 2019 rate case that had made a complicated and expensive demand charge tariff the default rate for new residential premises. And the commission also rejected Georgia Power's proposal to push new rooftop solar customers onto that same complicated and expensive demand charge rate. So demand charges can hit customers with a big fee based on the single highest usage hour that they have in a month, regardless of whether that high use hour coincides with a time when the system is stressed or a time when other people are using a lot of energy. Demand charges can be really hard to predict and avoid. You can't always, especially residential customers, can't always avoid using multiple appliances at one time. Maybe your refrigerator kicks on at the same time that your air conditioning kicks on and you're at home on a Saturday doing laundry. So they can be pretty tough, pretty unpredictable, and not necessarily a good fit for a lot of customers. Demand charges can make it harder for customers to save money when they invest in energy efficiency or on-site solar. So they can be expensive, unpredictable, and really reduce the value of clean energy investments. So even though the rate design win is a little bit of a wonky and technical one, I think it was a really big step forward for us in our 2022 advocacy. We can go to the next slide. In the 2022 IRP proceeding, Georgia Power had proposed 2 new demand response tariffs, and the commission ultimately approved those. So they have the potential to bring up to 250 megawatts of new demand response capacity onto the system. And then I also wanted to highlight another big win. So part of the 2022 IRP result, we'll have Georgia Power file in the next IRP, the 2025 IRP, a scenario that allows demand response and energy efficiency to compete head-to-head with traditional supply-side resources. So I think that's a really important step forward towards really evaluating efficiency and demand response as resources and letting them potentially fill needs that we have moving forward. And I know that's a lot, and I definitely didn't cover everything. So I'm going to kick it back to Blair and happy to answer questions during the Q&A.
Thanks, Jill. Quick follow-up for you. You did mention a lot of different issues. I imagine many people who are on this call care about many of those. If you had to kind of choose favorites or pick an issue where you hope to see more engagement from the broader community around, what would that be?
I am rooting for energy efficiency. So as I mentioned, Georgia has a lot of room for improvement here. I think that we have a lot of potential, untapped potential, and it's been a tough issue, I think, to get a lot of attention around. So I'm hoping that as a community, we can really mobilize around efficiency and get a lot more progress in the 2025 IRP.
Thanks, Jill. All right, Briante, you are up. I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
I'm muted. Can y'all hear me now? Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm Briante McCorkle. I am the executive director at Georgia Conservation Voters. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Georgia Conservation Voters, we work to advance climate and environmental justice. We work to hold elected officials accountable for their actions and votes on the environment. We also have a sister organization, the GCV Education Fund, that organizes and mobilizes Georgians to advance climate and environmental justice. I'm particularly passionate about EJ, environmental justice, which requires the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of people who are impacted by potentially harmful environmental decisions. If the people on the front lines are included meaningfully, theoretically, this means that the ultimate decision or policy that's being made has taken into consideration their needs and is a compromise that addresses those needs. That's actually what I studied. I studied public policy, and it is a science where all stakeholders are brought in and given an opportunity to have meaningful input, and that input helps mold and shape fair and equitable policies for all involved. Unfortunately, I learned very quickly this is not the way that things happen in real life. And we've seen big business and corporate interests often outweigh the interest of the people who are most burdened by those decisions. And there are countless examples of this, but there are few that are more egregious than the Public Service Commission and decisions it makes to continually support Georgia Power's bottom line. The first time I advocated before the PSC, I was really surprised, first by the timing of the hearings, which occur when most of the public is working during the typical 9 to 5 hours. And as a result, the room is very empty, save for a few interveners, PSC staff, the commissioners themselves, and of course, Georgia Power employees. I was there because I care very much about doing everything we can to mitigate further destruction of our climate. Since we largely missed the window to stop climate change, it's really important that we're building communities that are resilient, and that I'm also keenly aware that people who are on the front lines of climate change are mostly people of color and low-income people. They will experience the impacts of a changing climate first and are the least prepared to be resilient. So it's really important that we take as much action as we can now. And as one of the top carbon emitting sectors in the US and worldwide, adopting renewable and distributed energy is really critical if we're going to adequately address climate and build a just and sustainable future. I'm also interested in energy because many people in my family are energy burdened. My late grandmother told me many times while I was growing up to turn off the lights because we will be sitting in the dark. At the time I didn't understand she was talking about energy burden. Energy burden is the percent of median yearly income that households pay for electricity and gas bills. Households nationally on average pay about 3% of their income on energy bills. A household that pays more than 6% of their income on energy bills is considered to have high energy burden, while a household that pays more than 10% is considered to have severe energy burden. I do have a map to share that shows areas in the state with the greatest number of households with an energy burden above 10%. And so thank you for sharing that. I want y'all to keep this map in mind because it is relevant for the remainder of my presentation. So in 2019, during an integrated resource plan and the subsequent rate case, I joined a group of organizers to help people understand the fairly complicated and under the radar proceedings of the PSC. We worked with a group of volunteers, some young, some old, to come comment before the public service commissioners. It felt like they were very dismissive and even in some case poking fun at the people who were commenting, asking for more renewable energy, more support for energy efficiency programming, and asking the commissioners during the rate case to not continue hiking and adding fees to power bills, hiking rates and adding fees to power bills. It did feel like our concerns were falling on deaf ears. So I did request a meeting with one commissioner in particular, because I wanted to understand what we were missing. Why was Georgia Power slow walking progress on renewable energy? Why was there not more support for energy efficiency? Why, if the company is performing so well profit-wise, do they have to keep raising bills so high? At the time, that commissioner told me that it was very difficult to push back against the power company and that he learned that incrementalism was the best approach. Now, I disagreed strongly, and I want everyone to take a moment after this webinar to look up Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. He specifically spoke about the white moderate and the danger of incrementalism, especially for those who are being treated unjustly. So I left that meeting feeling very patronized, very frustrated. And, later that year, of course, the commission approved a massive rate increase and added fees to bills for Georgia Power customers. So I began to look at why the commission was okay with raising bills on their constituents. And it really led me to consider the makeup of the commission and its election structure. Despite there being 5 districts, commissioners are elected statewide, and the commission has been represented nearly by all white Republican men for well over 100 years. This is problematic because if you look at a map of the PSC districts and zoom into the PSC District 3, you will see that it is comprised of the core counties of the metro Atlanta area: Fulton, DeKalb, Clayton, and previously Rockdale County. The maps have been since redrawn. The counties in the district these counties and this district is overwhelmingly African-American. And if you keep that energy burden map in mind, this is also the area that has the most energy burden households. So if you look at the elected officials who represent that area outside of the PSC, they are also overwhelmingly people of color and mostly Democratic. So this district's representative, this PSC District 3, their representative has been a white male Republican for well over 100 years, with few exceptions. So I really started to ask why, and it's definitely the statewide election structure, because despite the people who live in the district attempting to vote out that commissioner, because that commissioner was voting continually against their interest, their votes were being drowned out or diluted by voters in other parts of the state, many of whom aren't even paying Georgia Power bills. So this represents a classic case of vote dilution, in which is a violation of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. So I did file a lawsuit along with several other plaintiffs, challenging this election method. And in August of 2022, a judge agreed with us and ordered the Secretary of State to remove the PSC races from the ballot and that the General Assembly remedy the election structure. I want to be clear, this is a victory not just for Black voters, but for all voters who deserve to have a commissioner who truly represents the unique needs of their districts. So the state did file an appeal. We had a hearing in December. We are eagerly awaiting the ruling from that hearing to learn what the fate of the PSC elections will be. Still, none of this legal action stopped the Public Service Commission proceedings from moving forward. In the middle of our lawsuit in 2021 during the pandemic, commissioners moved to allow Georgia Power to add additional fees to power bills, further straining customers who are already stretched thin in the middle of a national crisis. They also approved disconnections in the middle of the summer, in the middle of a pandemic. And the result was tens of thousands of households being disconnected from a vital utility. Again, most of these being low-income households, people of color. And actually, I just discovered a report from the Energy and Policy Institute last night that revealed that Georgia Power was among the top 3 utilities to disconnect customers during the pandemic amidst record corporate profits. So this brings me to the 2022 IRP and rate case. Again, we were seeking more renewable energy investment in energy efficiency programs that help low-income customers who are unlikely to access solar in the near future. And we also wanted to keep rates steady during the rate case. So this time during the rate case, we decided to try to file individual ratepayers as interveners because the PSC under Tricia Pridemore's leadership had moved to make public comment nearly inaccessible, even stating early on in the year that there would be no public comment at all. So for context, the 2019 rate case PSO allowed for the testimony of public witnesses, but the 2022 PSO, which is a procedural scheduling order, eliminated public witnesses. So we worked to help 26 people, regular everyday ratepayers from all over the state of Georgia, to file to intervene. It was a very complicated process. Shout out to my organizing director for working on that. But of course, this did not make the Public Service Commission very happy. So in late July, the Public Service Commission issued an amended PSO stating that any individual that presents testimony during this proceeding may not conduct cross-examination of other parties in an attempt to limit any potential intervener's ability to ask hard questions of Georgia Power's witnesses. In August, the PSC did issue a memo backtracking to now allow public comment after being alarmed by a wave of public participation in all the interveners that we were filing. They issued new guidelines with public comment that still severely restricted participation by limiting the comment period to the first day of the hearings only for about an hour and restricting each speaker to about 3 minutes. So it really was only enough to allow about 20 people to give comments. And so they also said that any public commenter must leave the hearing room after they speak. These are all big equity issues, a complete lack of transparency that we're seeing here. The PSC did ultimately reject all of our intervener applications. They asked us to consolidate them under GCV Education Fund, which we decided not to do because in previous rate cases, we were accused of being special interests. And so we did engage the public instead with a media campaign, vigils, rallies. We organized people from all over the state to speak during public comment. Commissioners were visibly agitated during public comment. And some commissioners even went so far as blocking critical voices on social media. And so, as you all saw, all of this culminated in a major rate increase. The state's largest electric utility will collect $1.8 billion from ratepayers over the next 3 years. I've heard Georgia Power executives try to manipulate the narrative that people should pay for the power they use, which I find to be very flippant because people who want electricity, which is nearly everyone in the year of our Lord 2023, they don't have the choice but to pay for electricity to survive and thrive. It is really difficult to get by without electricity in 2023. So the real question is, why are they paying so much? Is the amount they are paying fair? And in the final rate case ruling, the commission agreed to keep Georgia Power's return on equity or their shareholder profits nearly the same. Georgia Power has one of the highest return on equities of any utility. It's set at 10.5% versus 9.5%, which is the industry norm. So we have to ask the question, why? And at least one commissioner believes this is a concern, and that was Lauren Bubba McDonald, who was the only commissioner to vote against the agreement. And he argued that the utility should pocket less money. He said that's a significant amount of revenue that the company will get that ratepayers will be paying. When we look at the reasons why, it's clear that the Georgia PSC is granting Georgia Power these unusual profit metrics to address Plant Vogel's risk to stock and bond markets. Tim Echols is on video saying as much in the 2019 rate case administrative hearing vote. So everyone should be asking, is this fair? Is this sustainable? Is this just? Is this the best we can imagine for the future of energy?
Thank you, Briante. Let me ask you a quick follow-up before we turn it over to Alicia. You talked about different ways that you and your organization have tried to get different voices, community voices into the process. What have you found to be kind of the best path forward if people who are listening in want to share their concerns or opinions and have their voices heard at the Public Service Commission?
So the commissioners are elected officials, so you can reach out to them. All their contact information is on the Public Service Commission website. I encourage you to call them, email them, text them as much as you feel like you should. And don't wait for a proceeding. Tell them all year long what you want and what you need and what you expect out of your commissioners. That is incredibly important. For those who are active on social media, they can't block you. So please tweet them, whatever it takes to get in touch with them. We do have some proceedings that are coming up that we really want to make sure that we have a lot of people at making public comment. So if you want to reach out to my organization, gcvedfund.org, and sign up for our email newsletter, we're going to communicate different opportunities to get involved and engaged and come comment before the Public Service Commission. But again, you can reach them at any time. If you see them at public events, if you have their email address, if you get their phone number, call them, tell them how you feel, because they often say they don't hear enough from people, and that becomes an excuse for doing exactly the opposite of what most people want.
Thank you. All right, our last speaker of the day, last but not least, is Alicia Brown. So Alicia, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Blair. And wow, it's amazing being on this panel with so many people who have done so much good work. These are complicated proceedings, and especially want to shout out to Briante and GCV for getting so many community members who probably hadn't heard of the PSC before to come up and give public comment. It was truly some of the most powerful moments of the hearings, just hearing some of the struggles that people have gone through. So my role in the IRP and rate case proceedings was representing the Georgia Coalition of Local Governments. Next slide, please. Which consists of the City of Savannah, the City of Decatur, the City of Atlanta, the Athens-Clarke County Unified Government, and DeKalb County, Georgia. Next slide, please. The five of us have been working closely together through the Southeastern Sustainability Directors Network for several years now. And as each of us passed clean energy goals and developed plans for achieving them, we realized that we weren't going to be able to achieve those goals without getting involved in some of the more formal processes that dictate our energy resources. So we're united by our clean energy goals, most of us as soon as 2035, most of us, not just for our government operations, but community-wide. We're also united in concern for our citizens, and particularly those that are impacted by energy burden, as Briante was pointing out. As you could see, some of the worst, most severe energy burdens were concentrated in the Atlanta metro area, where most of our interveners are located, and in the Savannah area, where I am located. Next slide, please. We were advocating for a lot of the same things that Jill and Kevin and Briante were talking about. We kind of occupy a unique space in the IRP in that, yes, we are large customers with interest of our own and clean energy goals for our operations, but we are also representing the community. And there really hadn't been a voice like that in the process before. But some of the issues we were really pushing for was one, like the expansion of the popular monthly netting program. If any of you have been to Savannah, and I imagine a bunch of you have, we are renowned for our tree canopy, and we are quite serious about protecting it. We can't just go out and clear cut land if we had enough in the first place to build large solar farms. That's just not something practical for us. But we do have a lot of rooftop space, and we do have some capped landfills and things like that that would be excellent for solar if there were any mechanism for us to just not lose tremendous amounts of money on that investment. So monthly netting is something that's really important to us and was a focus because we specifically want to make sure that some of our more energy burden communities have a pathway to accessing solar. And that's not going to be the case if you're receiving avoided cost or even 4 cents above avoided cost. Georgia Power can sell the electron that you're pushing back to the grid at the full retail rate. So it's honestly a little bit hard to support them paying you anything less than that retail rate for it. We're also big fans of community solar because, as Jill was saying, some people just do not have a roof that's suitable. Their house isn't structurally sufficient. They don't own it. It's shaded by some of our magnificent live oaks. There's a lot of reasons that you can't participate in solar on your own through a rooftop program. So we want to have a functioning community solar program for that purpose. And also, there's just a lot of benefits to community solar. You can strategically locate it in locations that are beneficial to the grid. You get economies of scale. You can attract outside businesses. So a lot of those benefits that we talk about when we talk about the clean energy transition would be well realized through community solar. We also pushed hard for energy efficiency as a solution to some of those energy burden issues. And the coalition really tried to call out some ways that the existing energy efficiency programs could be improved based on our experiences with our citizens. So one thing we raised is the condition of many homes is such that you can't do energy efficiency work. If you have an active moisture problem, for instance, it doesn't make sense to insulate a house. If you have a really old home with knob and tube wiring, you cannot spray insulation in. If you have an active gas leak, sealing that home could have really serious health consequences. And currently, there's just not a good program through Georgia Power or otherwise to resolve some of those prerequisite health and safety issues. So what happens is, even though these most disadvantaged customers are paying for energy efficiency on their bills, they are unable to participate in it and just continue to be worse off and worse off. We've also raised some issues about streamlining the income qualification process. And we suggested using a census tract approach, because you can look at a census tract and you can see what the average energy burden is. And just from what we know from the history of redlining and things of that nature, people of similar income levels tend to end up living together. You're not going to have Jeff Bezos living among a neighborhood with a per capita income of $20,000. It's just not going to happen. But those kind of common sense solutions that would have administrative benefits for Georgia Power, as well as benefits from an equity perspective, didn't get the traction we wanted as of yet. Another issue is energy affordability. We've been pushing really hard to prevent the worst of the rate increases that were proposed and really hold up a lens to the proceedings and ask tough questions about, the IRA has provided a lot of new incentives for solar and storage. Is this plan that was approved in the IRP, are we fully taking advantage of that? Do we really need 6 gas PPAs approved in 2022 when some of them don't even come online until 2028? It's like, are we making these decisions with the full consideration that they require? Are we really grasping how much this could affect people? I also asked some questions about some of the discounts that we do offer. We have an income qualified senior citizen discount, and I received some criticism from certain members of the commission for asking, why are seniors different than younger adults who are in dire financial straits? If you're a young person with a disability, or if you are in just some unfortunate circumstances, perhaps you've been laid off, why should a senior receive better treatment than you? Why can't we treat all income qualified individuals with the respect that they deserve and provide the support that you need? Because this is the year of our Lord 2023. Everyone needs access to electricity. So we've also advocated for electric vehicle infrastructure, because we're reaching a point where we're having more low-cost electric vehicles, and there's with gas prices where they are, there are savings opportunities, and we want to start bringing those into low-income communities. And to do that, we need to make sure that we have the charging infrastructure to support them. And then finally, as Kevin alluded to, we've been pushing hard for access to the data that we need to make rate selection decisions. And also, since we don't have net metering, financially, it makes a lot of sense to size your solar systems to minimize exports. So we're saying that if we're generating this data, and if you're forcing us into a less economical solar structure, you should at least give us the tools that we need to work with it. So going forward, what we're looking to do is take some of these fights that are unresolved to the legislature. We're monitoring bills that will hopefully provide pathways for monthly netting and potentially competitive community solar. And we're hoping that those will have robust data access provisions. And I will say we did get some wins from this advocacy, namely the community solar program is now no longer a premium program. It's probably, I would call it a bill neutral program offering. And there is some discussion about a corporate subsidized income qualified program. We also had the increase in the energy efficiency targets and a motion from Commissioner Johnson opening up some data access, resolving some issues that we've observed. And we've also seen robust investments in Make Ready, or the infrastructure that's needed to support charging. So our involvement it really does make a difference. I do agree with Briante about the incrementalism and the challenges of that. I honestly hate going to community meetings and hearing people say, I reached out to my public service commissioner and they still raised my rate. It's like, yeah, but we saved you $1 billion over 3 years. And that, it doesn't sound that good to say you save $1.1 billion when you still have an increase of 1.8. But just continuing to engage the right people and specifically trying to get some more powerful players to come to the table. We've really been trying hard to get some businesses to join the advocacy, and we're hoping that partners like Drawdown Georgia can help us grow our coalition to not just be local governments, but also community organizations and businesses, but also looking to increase the ranks of local governments, get more of our rural communities that are underrepresented in the coalition at the moment and might command a little more respect from the political makeup of the commission. And I'm open to questions.
Thanks, Alicia. I am going to ask one quick follow-up question, but I want to remind everyone that you can put your questions in the Q&A box. We're going to take a few of those before we wrap up, so please feel free to do so. But before we turn to the Q&A box, Alicia, this was the first time that cities joined together in this way to intervene in front of the Public Service Commission. So are you thinking of doing this again? Are the cities interested in coming together again? And do you expect that this will be like the same group of cities who intervene in the future? Or are you guys open to expanding your partnerships?
We're definitely planning to do this again. We're planning to be involved in some of the issues that are lingering from the IRP. Like, for instance, the issue of extending the income qualified discount to non-seniors. But we're also planning to be back in 2025, and we are open to any city or county government that would like to join us. And in fact, we would love to see the ranks grow.
Great. Well, we're going to take a few Q&A from the chat box before we wrap up. I'm going to get everyone out earlier on time. But first, Jill, I see you answered Patty Duran's question in the chat, but I wonder if you could talk about it a little more. If you are a customer who was able to be part of that 5,000 capped monthly netting program for rooftop solar, are you able to stay in that program, or are you getting kicked off into the new rate?
Thanks, Blair, and thanks, Patty, for the question. So in the final rate case order, and as part of the stipulation that Commission staff and Georgia Power and some others entered into, those 5,000 existing net metering customers can stay in that program for 15 years. And I included, it's about, actually, now that you say that, I don't know if everybody else can see the answered question. So let me just say it in case anyone wants to look it up. So there's a stipulation attached to the final rate case order, and it was paragraph 33 of that stipulation that includes the 15-year grandfathering provision.
Great. Thank you, Jill. I'm going to send this one to Alicia next. So you mentioned the fact that we do have some new federal legislation that impacts some of the technologies that are considered by the Public Service Commission, including solar. Was the bills like the Inflation Reduction Act, were those things considered by the Public Service Commission as they went through the process this year?
So part of the challenge was that the IRA, I believe, came part of the way through the process. So I don't think it got the full consideration it deserved. And that's something we raised in the rate case, was the potential to need to redo some of the modeling that was done in the IRP to reflect the IRA. I think part of the concern was it wouldn't have changed too much due to some modeling choices made by Georgia Power, namely to say that solar does not offer any capacity contribution with or without storage. There were also some concerns in general around interconnecting additional solar due to the lack of transmission capacity between southern Georgia, which is ideal for solar, and northern Georgia, where most of the load is. So I don't know how much would have changed, but I do think there should have been additional consideration that just wasn't provided at the time.
And Blair, if I could also say something about that IRA, just to build on what Alicia said, I think in the rate case, one of the challenges we faced in our net metering advocacy were arguments that were being made to commissioners by Georgia Power and some of their witnesses that you don't need to expand net metering because we have the IRA and we don't know about the benefits that might flow from that. And so I think even with incentives like tax credits being put back up to the 30% level for rooftop solar, we had to do some myth busting with commissioners. First, this isn't a 30% up from zero. The tax credit hadn't been ratcheted down very much from 30% and hadn't been ratcheted down for very long. So it's just putting it back up to the full 30%. And also reminding the commissioners that tax credits alone can't, solve this problem. We need good policies in place. For instance, pushing back against forcing solar customers onto an expensive demand charge tariff. Putting solar customers on a demand charge tariff could really erode any benefits that they would get from increased tax credits. So the policy is still really important and relevant. And so the commission still has a lot of power over what happens moving forward.
Thanks, Jill. I'm gonna do two more quick questions. First, we heard I think there were some comments about the Make Ready program involving EVs. Kevin, I'm wondering if you have any kind of information for people who are interested in what that program is and what the Public Service Commission decided in that space.
I'll take a shot. The Make Ready program is the utilities investment in expanding the EV charging infrastructure throughout the state. And if I remember correctly, and I don't remember the numbers, but Georgia Power proposed a certain amount of expenditure over 3 years. In the stipulation, I think that was scaled back to 35% of the original proposed amount. And then there was a commissioner motion on the final day of decision, which grew that back up to, I think, about 60 or 65% of the original Make Ready investment. So there is a significant tranche of money going toward EV charging infrastructure, but not as much as was originally proposed.
Thank you, Kevin. And Briante, I'm going to let you have the last word before we wrap up here. Two things I saw in the Q&A box, someone interested in joining your mailing list to sign up. So how can they do that? And then also, you mentioned this, but I think it may have gotten buried some. What is the kind of state of play on the court case that's moving forward about PSC elections?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can connect with us at our website, www.gcvoters.org or www.gcvedfund.org. Both of those are great places to connect. The Ed Fund is educational, more focused on organizing and mobilizing. GC Voters has a little bit more of a political and legislative lens to it. So, both or whichever one is your fancy. And the last state of play on the lawsuit is that we had an appeals hearing in December. And so we're waiting on the ruling from that hearing. The ruling will determine whether or not the General Assembly will need to redesign the Public Service Commission races. And again, what that redesign looks like was left very open by the judge. So it could be any number of things. We would hope to see something we believe is equitable, like district-based elections. But if they overturn the original ruling and decide that the races are fine as is, then what we're expecting is a special election. So it's either the ruling is going to get upheld, we're going to go to the General Assembly, they're going to fix the race, and then there'll be a special election with new rules, or it gets overturned and there's a special election with old rules.
Great. Well, thank you all again for coming and presenting, and thank you for everyone who tuned in to learn more about the IRP and the rate case. We will be posting a video of this webinar on the Drawdown Georgia website, which is drawdownga.org. So you can watch it again or share it with your colleagues and networks. For those of you who want to continue to stay up to date, both on webinars and programming like this, but also just climate solutions across Georgia, I would encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. It's free and it comes to your inbox twice a month. And you can do that also on drawdownga.org. So thank you again. We really appreciate our panelists and audience. And we will see you all soon.